The reason how this came about was I am a member of AAUW, which is American Association for University Women, and we have 2 book groups in our association. And I heard that Elisabeth had written this book, and I thought, well, it'd be fun if our 2 book groups both read her book, and then we would have her speak. So this is how that came about. Thank you.
Now, a word about the main title of the book, Trauterose or Trauterose. My foster parents named me after a singer they heard over the radio. If you happen to search online, you may see that name spelled as 2 words. That version is the pseudonym of a video recording artist, but mine is spelled as 1 word. Why did I write this book? For 3 reasons. First, I wanted to respond to reports and pictures I remember seeing in German magazines on newsstands in Munich and later in the United States, portraying glamorous lifestyles during the post-war years. Second, I wanted to respond to positive comments I heard from Americans about their understanding of the post-war years. Both impressions contrasted with my experience growing up and with those I came in contact with. I felt they told only one side of the story. Above all, we hear so little about that period compared with the massive literature about the actual war. For my 3rd reason in writing, I'm leaning on Chateaubriand, who said about 200 years ago, only common, that is, ordinary people, may talk about themselves. Otherwise, no one would. What does my book cover? My personal writing is bookended by Germany's stories, its recent past, the present, ending with what has changed. I have narrowed the scope to the period 1945-1950, the gap years, also referred to as the Hunger Years. The worst period was 1947 to 48. And the place, München, that is Munich mainly. You've heard me say Hunger Years, but didn't everyone think life was good again? Wasn't there the Marshall Plan? Wasn't there the Wirtschaftswunder, time of reconstruction? But the Marshall Plan did not come till 1949-1950. Those 4 or 5 years were the gap years. Some people actually profited. Die Zeit, the major German newspaper, wrote just this past May, revolution, war, government downfall. Why is it that in the end the same families always land on top? Who were the winners? Those who had done well before the war, those who had held important positions previously. Those same people were important again. The Allies needed support because they knew where things were and how to operate them, to rebuild the infrastructure and businesses. More than ready to help were some former SS members, feigning a change in political orientation. More importantly, the Allies were concerned about the rise of communism. They feared Stalin. America wanted to build a strong democratic defense in Europe against the Soviet Union. Now to the losers in the gap years. Who were they? Those too old, too sick, too damaged psychologically, who went down with Hitler's ship. That was us, and many more. Picture the German army retreating from Stalingrad in 1943 with the Russian army in pursuit. Picture East Germans, POWs, escapees of various nationalities, all fleeing west to a bombed-out landscape. It was a diaspora of 3 to 4 million that is still very little discussed today. Why? For one thing, the diaspora started in the far northeastern part of the country, geographically removed from the center west. Secondly, among those fleeing was a group known as the Junkers, a landed aristocracy who had lived in Prussia for generations on estates with huge landholdings. They tended to be very conservative. Many supported Hitler. Theirs was a singular way of life, gone forever, gone with the wind. What is left of them? Look at the fate of Königsberg that has been wiped from the map. The once German port city on the Baltic, the city of Immanuel Kant, was ceded to the Soviet Union under the Potsdam Agreement in August 1945 and renamed Kaliningrad. Today it is a Russian enclave with Lithuania to its north and Poland to its south. It is sovereign Russian territory, non-contiguous to Russia. Stalin wanted access to the Baltic. Germany renounced all claims to the city and its surroundings in 1990 as a price for reunification, according to a Wall Street Journal book review this past March. The well-known neo-expressionist artist Georges Baselitz was born in 1938 in a small town in Saxony, Prussia. He moved to Berlin in 1957. Baselitz died this past April at the age of 88, according to an obituary in the Los Angeles Times this past May. In a recording 3 years ago, he said, "I was born into a destroyed order, into a destroyed landscape, into a destroyed people, into a destroyed society. Against this background is the trajectory of my early life. Orphaned at birth in Munich in 1942, taken in 6 months old by foster parents, who never formally adopted me due to the chaotic situation. Why orphaned? Who were my parents? My mother left me at the birthing hospital because she was busy providing for herself. My father was a violinist, playing in an orchestra, touring Europe. As a Hungarian citizen, he was conscripted into the Hungarian army. I have never seen a picture of him. He is still declared missing today. I just told you all I know about my father. Who were my foster parents? My foster father, Vati for short for father, was a former SS officer. My foster mother, Mutti, was the daughter of a Bavarian farmer. After Munich, the foster parents moved to Salzgitter in Prussia, to a large property allocated by the Nazi Party that came with a housekeeper, a nanny, and a gardener. Conscripted laborers known as Ostarbeiter, that is, workers from the East. Because of the kind treatment I received from the Ostarbeiter, that all too short period of my life that was idyllic was followed shortly by the foster parents' trek westward with other refugees back to Munich. What did they and others find once they arrived in the West? Were they welcomed? Witnesses testify that doors were shut in front of them as they tried to find shelter. Some were so desperate that they took things into their own hands by moving unbidden into occupied houses and apartments, especially in outlying areas where locals had some land and farm sheds. Adam Taylor wrote an essay printed September 3, 2015, in the Washington Post entitled "The Forgotten Story When the Germans Were Refugees." My parents moved with me into a hut on a small garden plot on the outskirts of Munich that belonged to a commercial flour mill, an area called Tivoli. But how times have changed. Going forward 80 years for a moment. Today, these weekender plots are in great demand by city dwellers looking for a close-by getaway in the green. There are long waiting lists for vacancy to rent such a plot. I was with my foster parents in our garden hut for 11 years until the death of my foster mother in 1952. After her death, I was placed with Catholic sisters in a home for children called St. Annaheim, St. Anne's, in Munich for 7 years. Across the street was the building of the former German Luftwaffe. Leaving the sisters in 1961, I immigrated to the United States at the age of 18 without family support nor knowledge of English. My book ends with my first impressions, my efforts to adapt to a new way of life, in a new country, using a new language. With the passing years, I developed ambivalent feelings about my home country. In short, against this historical background, my memoir is a coming-of-age story. It's a foster care story, a refugee story, an immigrant story, an ESL story. It's a family story with issues such as parents versus school versus church, that is, religious leanings. I was baptized Catholic, but raised in a Protestant household. About my writing, you might think I was too young for recollections, but it didn't take long to become part of the chaos physically, via the surroundings, and psychologically through my foster parents' behavior and those of others in bombed-out Munich. Children hear, children see, children remember. I quote the writer, Jamaica Kincaid, "Memory summons up the past. Memory shapes the present. Memory dictates the future." To give the reader of my book a sense of our day-to-day living, I let the walls and the furniture be witnesses to our struggle. Life must go on, war or no war. One had to make an effort to establish a routine, to bring some sort of order into one's life. What was it like to get up in the morning, trying to find soap, comb, toothbrush, hot or at least warm water? Not a small task in those times. We had to find food and ways to cook it, find proper clothes and shoes to wear, gear for rain, clothes for winter. One still had to go to school without public or private transportation in all seasons, find a place to do homework, and we had to deal with sickness and death in the family. All the while, people still had to suffer the usual annoying indignities of adolescence, middle age crises, old age problems. Where did I find positives? Where did I find joy? I found them in nature and in music. In nature, I looked forward to changing seasons, the trees blooming in spring, shedding colorful leaves in fall. I enjoyed roaming in the city park, known as the English Garden, close by. I enjoyed running around in the meadow, covered with weeds and wildflowers, next to our hut. I enjoyed helping my foster father plant a garden for sustenance and watching it grow. Vegetables, fruit trees, flowers. And I felt joy in music. In my years with the Catholic sisters, I belonged to 3 choirs. At the sisters, at the parish, and at St. Michael's, a beautiful Renaissance early Baroque church in the city center. I looked forward to choir practice, singing, learning new songs, especially for holidays when High Mass was celebrated with a live orchestra at St. Michael's. Performances often recorded and broadcast over the radio. In 1961, I left Munich. Once in the United States, what did I hear about Germany? What did I read? And what did I see on television? My research began slowly. I also started to take notes on 3x5 cards. No personal computers then. Notes about what I remembered from Munich. What did I learn? Here's my history lesson, learned in the United States, not in Germany. I learned about the Holocaust by reading, listening, and watching television. I learned about the author Victor Klemperer, the Polish-born philologist who died in Dresden in 1960. In his diary, published in 1995, he wrote, "Ich will Zeugnis ablegen bis zum letzten. I will bear witness to the last." He described the reign of terror after the Nazis' election victory in 1933. Quote, "It's astounding how easily everything collapses. No one dares say anything anymore. Everyone is afraid." I learned about Dr. Edgar Feuchtwanger, who recently died at the age of 100, according to a New York Times obituary of just past September. He was a German-born British historian. In his book, Hitler, My Neighbor, published 2017 in French, 2021 in English, he wrote about his recollections. His family lived in Munich in the 1930s. Feuchtwanger was 5 years old then. Hitler lived across the street from them in an apartment. Feuchtwanger's book received positive reviews, though some critics found fault with him for not underlining the future horrors that would be brought about by his infamous neighbor. But that, Feuchtwanger noted, was exactly the point. He and his family did not know what was in store. All they knew was what they saw across the street. A man periodically coming and going. Hitler was just an ordinary person. There was nothing special about him. I asked myself, how could the Holocaust happen? Gabriel Tergit, a British journalist born in Berlin in 1894, who died in 1982, writes, "Jewish life preceding Hitler was positive." She based her historical novel, The Effingers, recently available in English, on her own family. The New York Review of Books this past February quotes her, "Many Jews hardly thought about politics or about being Jewish until the Nazis made it unavoidable. They shared with the Germans the values of culture, of humanism, the Enlightenment. Many Jews downplayed Hitler's threat and saw no need to leave." Tergit wrote, quote, "By 1933, the German Jewish bourgeoisie ceased to exist." The Süddeutsche Zeitung, the major newspaper of Bavaria, this past April wrote, "The Holocaust was possible because German society became desensitized in their daily lives to the degree that Jews would lose their rights and be murdered." One is reminded of Hannah Arendt's words in 1961, "The Banality of Evil," referring to the enormity of atrocities committed beyond comprehension. What else did I learn? On a personal level, looking back to my Munich days, I learned how the war and post-war years changed people and what became of them. I devote separate sections in my book showing the development of family members and others. I'm learning how my home country tried and is still trying to change. despite denial, amnesia, hypocrisy. An example is the slow reckoning of its past called Vergangenheitsbewältigung. In 1963, the first German court session took place in Frankfurt about Auschwitz, questioning still living SS officers. That's almost 20 years after war's end. Occasionally today, an old surviving concentration camp guard or secretary is brought before the court. But not much happens on account of the defendant's age and health condition. The big guns got away long ago, while others made their way by changing their political affiliation like chameleons. France, by the way, is having the same problem with delayed remembrance, judging from the few court cases appearing in the media now. A revelation and fierce reminder of the past that shocked present-day Germans was the 2005-2006 documentary film Der unbekannte Soldat, The Unknown Soldier. It showed common Wehrmacht soldiers committing atrocities on their own volition, not on orders by their superiors, as previously claimed. Seeing this film, the public was furious. People stormed out of the theaters. The documentary was quickly removed. The Nazis did those things, not the Wehrmacht, was their rallying cry. Always the Nazis, but not one admitted to having been one. But as the fashion designer Hugo Boss said in an interview, we all worked for him, Hitler. Hugo Boss manufactured uniforms for the Wehrmacht during the war. No longer discussed today, but worth mentioning here, is the historical strike of the historians, 1986 to 1989. A group of professors tried to relativize German atrocities by comparing them with those committed in other nations over time. Opposing them are humanists and philosophers such as Jürgen Habermas, who recently died at the age of 96, according to an obituary in the New York Times last March. In his long life, he pleaded for consensus building through conversation. He warned against relativizing the Holocaust. Habermas warned against erosion of his idea by market and social forces. What is the picture today in wrestling with the past? There are basically two groups, those in complete denial. Many of the old generation are still silent. They closed a door behind them, proceeding as if nothing had happened. We see a prevailing atmosphere of avoiding people who so much as mention it. Many of the young are also in denial for a different reason. That period of time had nothing to do with them, they say. But there are others who do show an interest in history. Almost daily, I read in online German newspapers articles about adults researching their heritage, while the young are prodding their elders in response to what they hear in their history classes in school. Part of the reckoning with the past addresses the use of slave laborers. The Balsen Company, a manufacturer of biscuits, serves as an example. In 2019, the heirs, the current owners of Balsen, reluctantly admitted that their grandparents had used slave laborers in their factories, but only after an organization unveiled some slave laborers' work records. And there is the slow admittance of possessing Jewish artworks that were stolen. There have been arguments for years about returning confiscated art. Cornelius Gurlitt, vast collection, was found by chance in Munich in 2013. tax authorities stumbled on his art treasures while searching his apartment looking for tax records. Recently, a new commission has been appointed to speed up the identification and the return of stolen art. Also working on that issue 80 years after war's end is France. The New York Times just last May wrote about an exhibit at the Musée d'Orsay in Paris called Displaying Art and Looking for Its Owners. A task force was established there in 2019 to coordinate the restitution of cultural objects stolen between 1933 and 1945. A private and vivid attempt at remembering that has become public is Günter Demnick's idea of Stolpersteine, that is pavers, in Köln, that is Cologne. In 1992, on his own, he began to memorialize all victims of the Nazi era, including the Sinti and Roma, homosexuals, religious martyrs. Demnick inserts pavers in sidewalks, in front of houses and apartments from which Jews were forcibly taken. Each paver is incised with the person's name and date of deportation. What is the Jewish situation today? Because of the history of the Holocaust, Germany is treading a fine line in all things concerning Israel, such as supporting it while sympathizing with the Palestinians. And there is a notable rise in anti-Semitism, as there is in other countries. Relevance. How is this relevant to us in a society? Looking back, we find that we are facing some of the same problems that our ancestors faced, namely, we still have wars, we still have refugees driven from home and country, we have immigration issues, culture shock issues, foster care issues, family issues. Looking at history then, we can see what has changed in Germany and what has not changed in politics, in the economy, in education, in society. Changes in politics. After the Berlin Wall came down in 1989, the AfD, Alternative für Deutschland, the far right, has made its mark. By now, it has even won a seat in parliament. Unthinkable a couple of years ago. They have toned down their aggressive rightist stance and instead are addressing issues of general concern. In this way, the AfD presents a critical challenge to the Christian Democratic Center-Right Party. Changes in the economy. Tariffs, taxes, inflation. Additionally, new NATO challenges call for serious discussions about rearmament. Besides calling for higher taxes, rearmament is fraught with social implications, the questions of the draft versus volunteers. According to the online newspaper Süddeutsche Zeitung, this past May 14th, a strike broke out in Berlin in answer to a government questionnaire addressed to all men born since 2008. The questionnaire is called Musterung, that is, evaluation of readiness for a possible draft. Questions such as, would you be able and willing to serve and why? To defend family, to defend the country? Or would you not be willing to serve and why? Right now, the government is only talking about volunteering. The basic right to refuse is still constitutional. However, filling out the questionnaire is mandatory. A refusal could result in a fine. Women and transgender people are not compelled to file. Immigration also has economic and social implications. Germany has built a generous, exemplary social net. After Angela Merkel, the previous chancellor, opened the floodgates in 2015, restrictions are now in place. Even the Swiss are asking themselves, in a recent vote on a population cap, are 10 million Swiss too many? What has changed in education? What is being taught in schools? The Holocaust has become a serious subject matter. Counselors and teachers take trips with students to Auschwitz, leading some young people to question their parents and grandparents about their former lives. What is the general atmosphere in the classroom today? Young students are no longer subjected to the fierce discipline used by the school staff during the post-war years. It's worth mentioning here that strict discipline during those times was not unique to Germany. In her book, Les Années Ernaux of France, the Nobel Prize winner in 2022 writes accurately about school sessions of that time. Quote, "Praise was sparse." Today, pupils, we call them Schüler, are treated with great care and sensitivity. Parents watch over their children carefully, to the point that teachers are trying hard to please all parties. It's not easy to be a teacher in Germany today. Parents versus school. School expenses were always a tense subject in our lean household. The school provided the books, but the rest was the parents' responsibility. And what could that be? It's more complicated today. In a New York Times article of September 9th, 2019, Christopher Schütz wrote, "In Germany, the weight of learning is felt early. For example, a primary district in Berlin gave parents a school-sanctioned 2-page shopping list of supplies. That includes, among other items, 3 pencils of precisely increasing hardness, a 10 to 12 centimeter plastic ruler. These supplies were to be carried in a prerequisite standard bag that costs about $275. This satchel comes with 2 wide straps to hold back the pupil's shoulders to encourage correct posture in growing up. Parents who can't afford that rely on social services. How is life for students in higher education? Not much change there. University students receive hardly any help. There are basically no counselors available, and they receive very little assistance from professors. University students are on their own. Higher education in Germany is very much tied to social status. Ungleichheit beginnt im Kindergarten. The disparity begins in kindergarten is a revealing online comment. In filling out forms, registering for school, for example, a father's name and occupation have to be listed, an immediate marker of social standing that basically determines his children's status. Statistics show that working-class children have only a 20% chance of reaching the university, while 60% make the grade coming from college-educated parents. Beyond education, are there changes in society in general? Until President Trump's recent policy shakeup, making the future less predictable, Germans felt confident, self-assured, comfortable. Like Americans, they think about how to make a good life even better, how to maintain good health, a good diet, how to preserve natural resources, how to respond to climate changes. In Germany, too, the gap is getting wider between the haves and have-nots. Great wealth is inherited from previous generations. Children are complaining about trying to keep up. with the lifestyle of their better off peers. Parents are complaining that their grandchildren are not thanking them for gifts. And social media influencing young people, filtering down to every level of society. And what happened to their famous work ethic? Today, Germans are less willing to work long and hard. A more casual attitude toward work prevails now. It is not unusual to call in sick when one wants time off for leisure activities or just rest, or to leave early to go on vacation to get ahead of the crowds. What has not changed? Germany is still a highly bureaucratized society. Civil registration of people's whereabouts is mandatory. One has to be registered at the local police station for changes in one's domicile, or just to rent a room. There are exact details, rules for everything, including the disposal of trash, even fines for putting the wrong thing into the wrong container. What about the former East Germany? Is anyone still talking about it? Reunited in 1995 with the West, it was for 70 years under Soviet control. East Germans consider themselves victims rather than perpetrators of World War II, such as the firebombing of Dresden. That was punishment for the actions of the fascist West as they see it. There are still difficulties in trying to equal the two Germanys today. Differences exist between cities and small towns and villages in the East. Some cities have prospered, such as Leipzig, Dresden, Chemnitz. Smaller places, less so. Overall, then, we see lower infrastructure and lower business activity, fewer investments in the East, and young people have not stopped leaving. Periodically, former East Germans now living in the West are trying to reconnect with their former part of the country. Recently, the group called Sudetendeutsche, that is Silesians, wanted to meet with officials in the city of Brno in the Czech Republic. The meeting was denied. It usually has to do with questions of property restitution lost during the diaspora, questions that fall on deaf ears. But today, a new focus is aimed at giving the East its due. A tourism campaign is underway, inviting travelers to Saxony to show off its World Heritage Sites under the category Immaterial Arts, such as its beautiful landscape. To return to the memory idea, in William Faulkner's words, the past is never dead. It isn't even past. The past is ever present. What I hope you'll take away from my book is the importance of knowing history. And I leave you with Baruch Spinoza's thought. Aim to understand, not to judge. Thank you.